resources programs. And we are recording this so that you can go back and review this later. So please acknowledge that you are being recorded. For those of you that are just on here with no Q&A, you're done. Just sit back and enjoy the webinar. We do have question and answers that we welcome throughout the presentations. So if you have one, we have a couple different options for you. There's a little chat panel. You should see a chat box where you can click on that and type in your question there. There's also a Q&A that you can type a question there, and there you can choose to ask that question anonymously if you don't want your name to display. And then you have a raise icon button in the middle of your screen, hopefully towards the bottom. And that way, if you are not into keyboarding or don't have access or have some type of a issue there, feel free to raise your hand and then we can unmute you and you can ask your question directly. So lots of options. You can also ask questions directly to the panelists. So if you're having any issues, I will be monitoring that. So please let us know. All right, Dave, back to you.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to introduce the panelists again because we weren't recording. So again, I'm Dave Apsley. I'm a natural resources specialist with OSU Extension, and I coordinate our Day in the Woods program. We've also got Stephanie Downs from ODNR Division of Forestry, Jim Downs from Hocking College, and Tom Macy from ODNR Division of Forestry helping out today. And we've got some other panelists. Danny Gill is with Hocking Soil and Water. She's on to help monitor our chats and our question and answer. And Jess Bowen with OSU Extension in Benton County is also on to help. So thanks all the panelists, and thanks everybody for joining us on such a beautiful day. So I want to do a quick overview. Day in the Woods is normally an all-day event in the field. The web page is right here. I'm not going to spend much time because we've got a full event, but normally we do all-day events in the field around the Vinton Furnace and other state forests in Southeast Ohio. Day in the Woods is a collaborative effort. We've got lots of partners, too many to mention all today, but I do want to acknowledge Hocking College, especially today, because normally that's where we'd be this morning. Normally in the last 3 or 4 years, we've been doing Day in the Woods at Hocking College, which gives us the luxury to split into smaller groups in multiple classrooms and get a bunch of us tree geeks out there with you in the field so we can break into small groups and really be able to let you see these things. Normally with Day in the Woods, this is how we would rather do it. We would be out there sorting samples right now, getting ready and digging through the samples and immersing you in identification where you can get your hands on these samples. And then normally in the afternoon, we'd be in the field where you can experience these trees where they naturally occur. Unfortunately, with COVID, we don't have that luxury today. So we're going to do our best. If you're joining us and didn't see it, this video is still out there, and we will post the video of what we're recording now and the resources at this site as well early next week. If you watch the video and you hear a grumbling noise, Stephanie smiled for me. It was Wrigley, her dog, at her feet when she was talking. So if you were wondering about that, like I was, that's what was going on. But this video, we tried to just give you an overview of some of the ID characteristics. The publication that we're going to focus on to teach you to key is available, and it looks like this. So it's a handy dandy pocket version that's a lot better than something you can print out. But again, when you registered, you should have gotten a link to be able to get to this publication and download it as a PDF. If you downloaded it early, you may have a version that has an error with page numbering. And as we get to that section, we'll address it. But that shouldn't matter a lot, and we'll tell you how to get around that. I wouldn't reprint it. If you've printed it, you can change the page numbers on a few pages and we'll be good. So again, I'm not sure how that happened, but we got an older version. So tree identification is really a process of elimination. There are hundreds of options when it comes to trees and shrubs in Ohio. And unless you're super experienced, and even those of us that have done this for decades, we still can't keep them all in our head without keying through them. So what we really recommend you to really start using a keying process in your head and start separating the trees into smaller and smaller groups until we can identify it. So this is what the inside cover of that publication looks like. And we're going to walk you through several examples as to how you would key. And then once you get to a certain point on this flow diagram, it'll tell you the letter and the page number that you need to go to. So when we get to the first one, we'll explain that. For instance, A should be on page 8. Some of you, A may be on page 10. So if you have that problem, if you just pay attention to the lettering and not the numbers of the pages, you'll be fine. Also, right inside the cover is another way to key quickly. If you don't like the flow chart, you're not quite as visual, you can also use this as a way to confirm that you're in the right spot on the key. Before we dig in too deep, I want to do a quick review. The first thing we talked about, we spend a lot of time on, is really important for you to understand. There's Joshua. How are you this morning, Joshua? Is to understand leaf arrangement. Where a leaf is attached to a twig, we have a bud, and that area is called a node. And if we have 3 options on the way trees have leaf arrangement. If your buds and leaves are alternate sides of the twig, we call that alternate. And most of the trees and shrubs you're going to deal with in Ohio are alternate. If they're paired, you have a bud on each side of the twig, just like your arms, one on each side of your body. That's called opposite, and that's a smaller group of trees. I think I left that slide out, but with opposite, remember mad buck. Maple, ash, dogwood, and buckeye are the opposites. Again, mad buck, maple, ash, dogwood, and buckeye. And there are very few trees that are whorled. In fact, in Ohio, I don't even think there's a native tree that's whorled. The one that's pretty common out there is catalpa, which is a tough one to key out in the key, right, Jim? So there is a shrub that's whorled, and we talked about that in the video, and I actually got an email from a participant who said, I've got buttonbush and it doesn't look whorled. And I'm like, you're right. Buttonbush can either be whorled or opposite, but if you're finding whorled, it's probably going to be buttonbush or catalpa. So again, leaf arrangement is the first thing we're going to pay attention to if we have a broadleaf tree. We might mention some of these terms. We've got simple leaves where each leaf has a single blade. And when you're looking at trees, I highly recommend you find the bud, find the twig, and everything beyond the bud is the leaf. So this is a cartoon version of an oak leaf, something in the red oak group, and it's a simple leaf because it has a single leaf blade. You can also have compound leaves where the leaf is attached back here. This whole thing is a single leaf, but it has multiple leaflets. We call that a compound leaf. And there are various versions of compound leaves that you can have out there as well. The most common is pinnately compound. Pinna means feather, so they're kind of feather-like, central rachis, central stem, with leaflets on both sides. You can have palmate, palmately compound. You have the rachis, or the leaf stalk, and then the leaflets attach all at one point. And then finally, bipinnately or twice pinnately compound. And there are very few of those out there, but you actually have a rachis that splits and you have leaflets on that. And there are only a handful that fall into that category. So just an overview before we jump into the key. Again, we're going to start on the inside cover. So if you have your PDF or your key with you, I would recommend starting here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
All right, so we're going to walk you through a few different species. We're just going to kind of take turns and walk through some of these to show you how the key works and what some of these features are that we're looking at. So we're going to use this photo here, or a couple of photos here, as our first example. And so if you look at the twig on the left, notice the zigzag branching pattern. This indicates that our tree has alternate leaf arrangement. There's only one bud at every location along this twig, and they alternate on different sides of the stem. The photo on the right is a photo of the leaf, and you can see this is a simple leaf, so it only has one section of leaf area, and there's no lobing along the margins, just kind of a basic leaf edge, no teeth, no lobes, pretty simple. It's also fairly broad compared to the length. So it's about as wide as it is long, which will come in important when we start looking at our key. And we'll see if I can advance these. All
There's
right.
just a little delay, it looks like.
Yeah. We look at this flow chart inside the key. We're going to start off on our broadleaf side. This is a broadleaf plant, not a conifer. And we have our 3 options. So alternate, whorled, and opposite. Our plant is alternate. So the one we're looking at first here is alternate. It is simple. So we're going to follow this left-hand side of our chart. It's broad. So again, it's about as wide as it is long. Not lobed. So you can see we're already narrowing down our choices, even though we haven't left this first flowchart page. And we have smooth edges. So we are going to go to section A, which in the correct version is page 8. Incorrect version might be page 10. But if you have your key, go ahead and go to section A. So hopefully page 8 or 10, depending on which version you have. But when we go to...
If you go there and if you get page 10, go ahead and change the page. If you got a written copy, just change the page number to 8, and then all the pages beyond there, just reduce them by 2, and you'll be good for the rest of the presentation. Yeah. Sorry about that interruption, Steph.
Nope, you're good. We want to make sure everybody's on the right page. So if we go to A, it's going to give you a summary of what we're looking at. So we have a broadleaf, alternate, simple, broad, non-lobed, smooth leaf. And this is what we're working with here. And this one's actually pretty easy because we only have 2 options. So under A, we have 1A and 1B. And we have to decide which of these 2 best fits the characteristics of the plant that we're looking at. So 1A has a leaf blade that's heart-shaped, less than 6 inches, which we don't have a good gauge of that when we're looking at a photo, but I can tell our leaf is less than 6 inches. It has a petiole that's swollen on both ends, which we couldn't see in our photo. A small tree, we also couldn't see that in our photo. Flowers early in the spring and flattened bean-like fruit. So a lot of these features we don't have in a photo, and that's where it's really nice to get out in the field with everybody and do these tree ID workshops live in the woods. Based on our photos, I think we have enough information to decide that we do have a heart-shaped leaf, 6 inches, and it's not a fan-shaped leaf. And so we're gonna go with 1A, which is Eastern redbud, which happens to be my favorite tree. So if we look at our photos again, Eastern redbud has alternate leaves, alternate buds along the twigs, heart-shaped leaves that are pretty simple. And the other photo we've added here is a photo of the flowers just about to bloom in the spring. So these pinkish, purplish flowers tend to be clustered along the twigs. So that's a pretty simple species to look at keying. So we're going to jump and do one that's a little bit harder. So our second one that we're going to look at here, we again have a photo of the twig and a photo of the leaf. And again, this is another alternate plant. So if you notice on the twig, there's only 1 bud on the side there on the left-hand side. But one important thing with this one is if you notice the end of that twig, we actually have a cluster of buds. So there are a lot of buds located at the end of the twig. But along the main twig, there's only 1 bud at a time. And if you take a look at this leaf, it's again a simple leaf, but this one has a little bit more characteristics. So it has some lobing. And it's got rounded lobes that tend to vary in size and shape. So if we go back to the chart, we're still in that broadleaf category. We're still in the alternate category. Simple leaf. This one, though, was longer than it is wide. And so this falls in the medium to narrow category because it's more than 1.5 times as long as it is wide. And this is usually the trickiest step when you're keying out alternate plants. It's determining whether this leaf is broad or whether it's medium. Some of our species will kind of be in the middle. You're not quite sure which one it's going to go to. Some of the species in the key you can actually key out either way. Most of them, though, you have to get this step right to get to the right species.
I'll just add to that a little bit, Stephanie. When we developed this key, we had a hard time figuring out how to break all those broadleaf simple alternate leaves up. So that's the only way we could really do it without looking at other characteristics that aren't there year round. So that's why we decided to go with that. And if you look for an average leaf on the tree, it should work most of the time for you.
Yeah. This one was medium to narrow, so it was longer than it is wide, and it had lobes. So now we're going to a different section of our key. We're going to go to F, which should be page 14. So once we get to section F, again, we have that summary. This one's a little more complicated. So we have a whole lot more than 2 options when we start looking at this one. And the way to work through these keys, you have more options, is to look at the paired numbers. So we're going to start out by looking at 1A and 1B. to start out there together here, which makes it a little bit easier, but that's not always the case. So 1A and 1B, we have two options. So our leaves are single, double, or triple lobed, which means they have different shapes. May have no lobes, may have one or two lobes, with a lemony odor, and the twigs are green. Our twigs are not green, and all of our leaves are going to be the same general shape on this plant. So I know we only have one in the photo, but I can give you a little background info besides that. So we're going to go with 1B. Our leaves are not as above. Now, if you look at 2A and 2B, they're actually separate from each other. So 2A has a bunch of additional numbers below it. 2B has different numbers below that. We're going to compare the same digit. So we're going to look at the two options for 2. So 2A is leaves with bristle-tipped lobes. Oh, thanks, Dave. I forgot. 2B is leaves without bristle-tipped lobes. Now, if you recall that photo, our lobes on our leaf were rounded. They did not have bristle tips. So we're going to go with 2B. And then we're going to compare 6A and 6B. So leaves with shallow lobing or that resemble large teeth versus deeper lobing. Our lobes were pretty well defined. So I'm going to say they were better than shallow lobes or large teeth. Now mine's not going. So we're going to say 6B, deeper lobing. Then we're going to look at 9A and 9B. We only had the front side of the leaf in our photo. I'll tell you it was not hairy beneath. So it's smooth beneath, which gives us 9B. And then our last option here is 10, looking at leaves with 7 to 9 lobes of varying depth versus leaves with the middle sinuses that nearly reach the center vein. Our sinuses did not nearly reach the center vein, so they were less than half the width of the leaf, which leads us to white oak. These are our species here. And Dave, for some reason, mine's not moving.
Okay, I'll go ahead and advance you.
Thanks. Go back to our photos. One of the things I pointed out earlier was the cluster of buds at the end of the twig. That denotes our oak group. And so if you see that cluster of buds at the end of the twig, you can usually assume it's an oak. And our leaf rounded, it better puts it in the white oak group, and then we can narrow it down to the actual species of white oak. And of course, help. So there's a picture of your fruit, which also says that it's in the oak group.
Okay.
Okay, we did have something come up in the chat, so let's see. We don't have a good way, Rose, of keeping the image of the leaf and stem through the key. We tried a couple different options and it got so messy that we decided to try to go back and forth between the key and the photos. So unfortunately, this is one of the problems we face with doing this virtually.
Yeah, we love to have them in.
It can work.
We love to have it in your hand is what we really like to do, but we're doing our best.
Yeah. So the last one I'm going to work through with the key is this one here. And this one's different than the first two we've gone through. And that if you notice on the twig, we actually have a pair of buds at the point here. So this is an opposite tree we're going to key out. So we have an opposite tree, tell by the buds on the first photograph there. And the second is a photo of one leaf. So this is a compound leaf. And if you notice, all of the leaves attached to the rachis at one point. So we have a palmately compound leaf in this photo. So if we go to our key again, we're still a broadleaf. So we're still looking at broadleaf plant. This time, we are going to opposite. Under our opposite, we're going to go to compound. So we know we have a compound leaf. And we know that it is a palmately compound leaf. So that's going to take us to N, or page 19, if it's corrected. So if we go ahead and go to N, we have another one here. We only have two options. So we have 1A and 1B. Usually 5 leaflets is the same for both, so that's not extremely helpful. Bruised twig has a strong skunk-like odor. Fortunately, we cannot smell this twig through the computer, but I can tell you that this one should have an odor to it. And the fruit is going to have a spiny or bumpy husk. This is our Ohio buckeye. Now, we did not give all of the information necessary to between Ohio and yellow buckeye in those photos. And so if we look at our photos again, actually we might have, was the fruit on that photo? No.
Yes, it's on the second one. I'm
On the
trying to
second
answer
one.
that.
Yeah, so this time we have a little bit additional information that will help. And this is a good point in that leaves aren't always going to identify your tree alone. Sometimes you do need some additional information. So we can get this one down to a buckeye, but a little bit more information to figure out which buckeye it is. And in this case, it's our fruit. So we have spiny husk, which makes it Ohio buckeye.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. We're going to turn it now over to Tom to key a few out for you.
Sure. Yeah, so let's look at this next one here. This one is a bit different from the others we've looked at. So as we can see here in the photo, we've got a tree that has needles. So it's an evergreen conifer tree. So we see the cones here in the picture as well. And some key things to notice on this tree is that looking at the needles, we can't quite see it off to the left side, but this grouping of needles here, they're clustered. And we've got 5 total needles that attach to the twig. So that's one key thing to notice there. The cones, they're pretty long and narrow in shape. So that's another key point to remember. So if we advance to the next
Can you do that
slide
now,
here.
Tom, or am I going to have to do it?
Let me try. Doesn't look like I do. Let me do this.
Okay, there you go. Now try it.
Okay.
If it doesn't work, I'll just go ahead and do it. It seems like there's going to be a delay, so why don't I just go ahead
Yeah,
and do it?
okay. So looking at our flow chart, as we determined, we're dealing with a conifer here. So that's there on the right side. So that means we go to a different section of the key, section O, or if you're in a manual with the correct page numbers, that's page 20. So looking now at section O, looking at 1A and 1B, do we have foliage that is flattened and scale-like? No, that wouldn't be the case for this one. So that's going to take us down to 1B, where we have foliage that is needle-like. And that's definitely what we're looking at here. So if we drop down next to 3A and 3B.
And 3B's off the screen. It was several pages later.
Okay. So looking at 3A, do we have needles in bundles of 2 or more? And yes, we do. If we recall back to that image, we had 5 needles in that bundle. So that leads us down to 4A and 4B. Do we have needles mostly in bundles of 2? Or do we have needles in bundles of 3 or more? And so that would be 4B because we were seeing 5 there. So looking down at 8A and 8B, under 8A, we see needles mostly in bundles of 3 and twisted. 8B is needles in bundles of 5. And so that is definitely the one that we would choose. And it also has soft, flexible foliage. The needles are pretty soft and bendable with a distinct white line if you look really closely with it. Tough to see in the photo, but if you had it in your hand, it would be more apparent. And those needles are pretty long, 6 to 8 inches long, and narrow cones. So that fits with the images that we saw there of eastern white pine.
Tom, that's the cone length is 6 to 8. The needles would be quite a bit shorter.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
They'd probably
Okay.
be like 3 inches.
Good point. Yep. The cones are pretty long there, 6 to 8 inches. All right. So moving
Ready for
on
the next one?
Yep, next one here. So a few things to notice with this tree. It's a broadleaf tree. So we're back to the broadleaf section. Looking at that twig photo on the left, we can see alternate buds, which means the leaf arrangement is going to be alternating on the twig. Our leaf there has a serrated margin or teeth on the margins of the leaf. Another good thing to keep in mind. And if you look closely at the image of this leaf, on each of the larger teeth or serrations on the margin, there's actually smaller teeth, which we would refer to as doubly serrate. So this teeth has a doubly serrate margin, which is small teeth on larger teeth. And another thing you can't really get from this image, but if we were to be looking at it in the field or had it in your hand, these leaves are fairly large, typically 4 inches or longer in length. Another thing to notice here on the twig, we don't have a cluster of buds at the tip of that twig. So that's another important point to keep in mind.
Hey, Tom,
yeah.
Tom, this is Julie. We do
Sure.
have a couple questions in the chat for you guys. This one, with the opposite compound palmate options, it looks like there's only buckeyes. Is there a reason the horse chestnuts are not an option?
I'll take that one since I put the key together. We just tried to make the key simple. And if we include everything, then the key gets much more complicated. So the key is meant to be a teaching tool. And so we just arbitrarily, well, we picked 88 because we have 88 counties in Ohio. And so horse chestnuts would fall into that same category, but they are not native, or the horse chestnut that's in the landscape is not native. So we mainly also focused on native plants. Okay,
Right,
Tom,
and then
you ready for
Stephanie
me?
just made a comment, so I think you're good there now. We do have a Q&A. Can you explain the difference between American elm and slippery elm when appropriate?
Tom will get to that.
We'll be getting to that shortly.
All right.
Okay, so that was the images that we were looking at for this tree here. And one other quick thing, Dave, if you can go back to the image of the leaf. One other thing I want to point out on this leaf, on the very left edge of that image of the leaf, it's a little bit tough to see, but at the base of that leaf, where it meets the petiole, both sides of that leaf blade are not symmetrical. They're sort of uneven in where they come down and meet that petiole. So that's another key feature of this plant. Okay, so moving on to the flow chart, we have a broadleaf tree, and we have alternate buds and alternate leaf arrangement. We've got a simple leaf. And again, the broad or medium to narrow section, really this leaf is longer than it is wide. So we're going to choose that medium to narrow. And then we have toothed margins to the leaf or serrated leaf edges. So that takes us to section E or page 11. So in section E here, looking at 1A and 1B, 1A are plants that have thorns, spines, or spur shoots present on twigs. That was not the case with our plant. That takes us to 1B, no spines, thorns, or spur shoots. Next, we have leaves that are greater than 4 inches in length for 4A, and that would be the case for this plant. We had pretty large leaves.
Again, this key, this is the toughest part of the key. So that 4B would be several pages later.
Yeah. So we will follow 4A. So going under that, we go to 5A and 5B. Buds clustered at twig tip. We did not see that. So that takes us to 5B, buds are not clustered. Looking under that, we have leaf base symmetrical on 7A, or 7B, asymmetrical uneven leaf base. And so we did see that on our leaf. And also there we see doubly serrate leaf margin, twigs light and buds dark, so pretty dark buds. And another one you can't get from the photo, sandpapery or rough feeling to the leaf. And so that all leads us to red or slippery elm. And there was a question there about how to distinguish slippery elm from American elm. And so some of the features that we just went through and talked about with this plant would distinguish it from American elm. So things like looking at the twig, in most cases, your slippery elm, or sometimes called red elm, usually has those really dark brown buds. So that's one thing you can look for if those are present. As we mentioned, that rough or sandpapery feel to the leaf of slippery elm can oftentimes distinguish that from American elm. They often also will have larger leaves than American elm, which isn't always helpful unless you have them right side by side. And then one additional point that can help you, if you look at the bark on either of these species, they usually have some sort of corky ridges to the bark. And if you break a little piece off of slippery elm and you look at the cross section of that bark, it's usually sort of a solid reddish brown color. If you do the same thing with American elm, it's usually a spongier feeling bark, and you can see alternating layers of sort of brown and white in that bark. So those are a few good things that I typically look for to tell those two apart.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on to another here. Again, we've got another broadleaf tree. We're looking at key things to pay attention here, looking at the leaf. We have a pinnately compound leaf. So that leaf stalk or that rachis, that would attach to a twig right where there's a bud. So there's no buds along that rachis that we're looking at. Those are all leaflets that make up a single leaf. The tips of those leaflets are pointed. That's another thing to remember. If we look at the twig, we can see that those buds are arranged alternate on the twig, so we have alternate leaf arrangement. And another thing to notice here, I think there's an image later, but the cross section of that twig, if you cut it, we can see it in the middle of the wood of that twig. That's called the pith, P-I-T-H, at the middle of the twig there. There's distinct chambers or cells there in that twig. So that's another key ID feature here to look at. And we see the fruit there on the right, this round, sort of yellow greenish husk around a spherical fruit. So moving to the flow chart, we've got broadleaf tree, alternate leaf arrangement, and compound leaves. So that takes us to section G, which in the correctly numbered manual is page 15. So moving to section G here, under 1A, we have leaves mostly with more than 11 leaflets.
I counted 18 on that one, by the way.
Okay, that one had 18 leaflets. So yes, this tree typically has more than 11 leaflets. So moving down from there, 2A has leaflets oval with rounded or notched tip, or 2B, leaflet tips end in a distinct point, not rounded. And that was the case with our plant. So moving down, we've got twigs with pith that is distinctly chambered, or 4B, pith not chambered. So there's another image. If you cut a cross section of a twig, you do see that chambered pith there. So that takes us down to 5A and 5B. 5A would be leaves with 15 to 25 leaflets. The bark is dark and the fruit is globe shaped with a thick green husk. And 5B is bark with whitish flattened ridges, leaves with 11 to 17 large leaflets, and the fruit elongated. And so 5A is correct for black walnut.
Thanks, Tom.
Yep.
We're going to move on because we're running a little long, but I think we'll be good. We're going to turn it over to Jim, who has some really difficult ones to key for us. So.
That is very true. So the first one that we'll be looking at here, the things that I notice on this, first starting over with the stem, we have something that is alternately branched. We only have one bud located at each node, so it is going to be alternately branched. And we also have these tan and naked buds, meaning that the buds don't have any scales on them. If we move over and take a look at the leaves are trifoliate, so it's a compound leaf, but each leaf has only 3 parts. And we do see either kind of these large teeth or small lobes. I would consider those more teeth than anything on the leaflets themselves. And we have kind of a whitish to tannish colored fruit. So if we take that information and move it to our key, again, we're working under the broadleaf category. We are alternately branched. Again, we have compound leaf, leaf with multiple parts, and we are trifoliate. So we would want to look for letter I, which should be on page 18 in the correct version, otherwise page 20.
Okay, Jim, I hope you did your homework because this is tough.
Yep, and I see we have one choice here. So that is poison ivy. So if we read through the description of this, we should find that it fits what we saw in our pictures. So tan buds, white fruit, and the thing that a lot of people may not realize is that this can be either a clinging vine, so you'll see this physically attached up against a tree, or you can also see it freestanding. So I think I've seen them freestanding up to maybe 3 or 4 foot tall. And again, you probably have heard the saying, leaves of 3, leave it be. And so this is our poison ivy.
So we did have a quick question on confirming American elm. It says the tree shape, vased shape for American elm and location habitat. And Tom ended up addressing that.
The question just came up in the chat, is poison ivy a tree? No, but it is a woody plant, so it's actually going to be a vine. So I think this guide here covers not only trees, but also covers some, at least, of the important vines.
Yeah, I stuck this vine in there because if we're getting people to learn how to ID, this is one they need to learn right off the bat just to protect themselves. So that's why it's in there. It's the only vine in the key. Let's let Jim finish the poison ivy up, and then we'll let Tom take the elm question. How about?
Okay. Yeah. So if we look back over our description, we see those alternately branched twig, tan buds, 3 leaflets per leaf, and those little whitish to tannish colored fruits indicates that, yes, this is in fact poison ivy. So go ahead, Tom.
Yep, just quickly gonna acknowledge those points. Yeah, I think that is typically true. Your American elm, the large mature American elms do usually have that sort of vase shape to them. But that can be tough to see in a forest habitat, or if it's a smaller tree in the understory, you may not see that shape just yet. And yeah, typically American elms you'll see in the wetter riparian sites and floodplain forests. And slippery elm might be in more upland habitats, but that can vary quite a bit. You can sort of see both of those in almost any habitat.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, so I'll try to move through this one fairly quickly again. So looking at the leaf here, we do have somewhat of a heart-shaped leaf, and it is entire, and this is actually a simple leaf. If we look over to the bottom right, you look at the twig, something unique that you'll see here is that this is actually whorled branching. So it's a little bit difficult to see because you really spin and rotate that twig in your hand, but you would actually have, at each node, you would actually have a place where 3 leaves are going to be coming out at that. And that's part of the reason why this twig is so swollen at the nodes, is because you have 3 leaves coming out at that same location. And then you can see a picture of those like seed pods, upper right hand part of the. So if we look at our key, we will see that we are once again in the broadleaf category, and unlike everything that we've looked at prior to, this is going to be whorled, and it's not, sometimes it appear opposite, but most of the time it's going to be. So that should take us to J on page 18. And once again, pretty easy to identify here because we only have one choice, and that is northern catalpa. So somewhat heart-shaped leaves, bean-like fruits, and very stout twigs. And so I think they mentioned the only other plant that I'm aware of that's here in Ohio that is whorled, at least that is woody, is going to be buttonbush, which is going to be a small wetland shrub. I think there was a question earlier about some of the buttonbush appearing opposite. At least in my prior experience with buttonbush, it seems like most of the new growth, so this year's new growth on buttonbush is opposite, and then further down the stem on some of the older growth of the plant tends to be whorled. So that may be why you're seeing opposite and whorled on the same plant.
So there is a
David.
question about poison ivy. Sorry, Jim, are you finished with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Jim. So the question about poison ivy is there always fruit? I typically see fruit on a clinging vine when you start getting up in the tree. When it's kind of matted on the ground, I don't see a lot of fruit. So again, it probably varies with maturity of that plant. And then we're going to let Jim key his last one, and hopefully we'll be able to keep up with your questions. And we'll, if we don't catch all the questions now, we'll wrap up and make sure we get them all answered.
Okay, so here we have a, if we look at the twig, something that is oppositely branched. So we have 2 buds at each node. And if we look at the leaf, we have a simple leaf, primarily divided up into 3 lobes. And if we look at the leaf edges, so the margins of the leaf, you'll notice some fine serrations. That's going to be important. And then for the seeds, you have these wing seeds, Samara style seeds that blow around in the wind very, very well. So if we take that information, we can move that on to the key and broadleaf. This time we're going to be working under something that is oppositely branched. Below opposite, our choice is simple or compound. We are dealing with a simple leaf, and we are dealing with something that is lobed. So we would be looking at K, should be on page 18. We get to this, essentially we're looking at comparing 1 and 1B. So do the leaf edge have fine teeth between the lobes, or do they lack fine teeth? So here we'd be looking at 1A. We do have very fine teeth located between the lobes. So our choices here are narrowed down to either silver maple or red maple. So we have a leaf that has mostly 3 lobes, and not 5 lobes. We couldn't see the underside of the leaf to know whether it was somewhat silvery on the underside or not. But here we would end up with red maple. So a 3-lobe leaf and not silvery under the underside. So again, oppositely branched, fine variations along the edge, and primarily 3-lobed should get us to arrive at red maple.
Great, Jim. Thanks. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep it moving. There is one question about catalpa and whether it's why we're calling it native. The key is not just native things, it's common things in Ohio, and it is introduced in probably much more than 50 years ago, but it's been around, and you'll commonly see it out there on old farms and in urban areas a lot too. So I'm going to skip this last one, and we're going to jump into some resources that are out there. I went into the office, I got a dispensation, I was able to go in and grab some keys to prep for this, and these are just a few of my keys. And so where do you start? There's lots of information out there, and if you start looking on Amazon, they're not cheap. So when you start adding up the cost, so what we're going to do is have Tom and Stephanie and myself just review a few of these keys. If you have questions later about a certain key, feel free to email me and I'll share that contact with you here in a bit. So I think Tom's got the first one.
Yep. So first one I'm going to mention here is the Peterson Field Guide to Trees and Shrubs. And this is really applicable to basically the eastern half of the country. So there's a lot of good information in here. It's a fairly small guide, so it's pretty easy to carry along with you. It has some basic keys in here that will get you to genus, which is a group of related species of trees like oaks or maples, for example. And then there are some lower level keys that can get you to species that are shown there in the photo. It doesn't have any great images or photos. It really just has some basic illustrations of leaf shape. At the beginning of the book, there's some sketches of typical silhouettes of shapes of trees, which can be helpful if you're looking at a mature tree. But it's a decent guide. It probably isn't my favorite one, but it's not bad for getting to some of the basics of plant ID.
I found in most of these, the key is just really tough in almost every
Yeah.
book that's out there.
So this next one I'm going to mention Woody Plants of Ohio here, which is one of my favorites. I just want to acknowledge, yeah, Dave's got it too there. Just want to acknowledge the author, which she's sort of a really renowned scientist from Ohio, Emma Lucy Brown. Really just goes by Lucy Brown. But she was the second woman to receive a PhD from the University of Cincinnati. Actually, her sister Annette was the very first, who was also a really accomplished scientist. She was an entomologist that studied micro moths, and was really the world authority at the time on that topic. And so Lucy Brown, she also authored Deciduous Forests of Eastern North America and lots of other publications. She really was one of the foremost botanists and ecologists in terms of forests in the East at that time. So she was the first woman president of Ohio Academy of Sciences and the Ecological Society of America. She was instrumental in the formation of the Nature Conservancy. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend the documentary. It's a PBS documentary called A Force for Nature that came out a couple of years ago, and it's really neat just to learn about her life and her accomplishments, especially back at that time when really it was almost a completely male-dominated field. So pretty amazing Ohio scientists there.
I was able to find that video on, if you do a Google search under Kentucky educational TV, you'll be able to find that video and view it live.
Yeah. So about the guide, I think it's an excellent reference guide. It's a little bit larger of a book, so maybe not quite as easy to carry in the field, but not bad. What's really great about it is it's Ohio specific. And so it does give some really great descriptions, not only of how to identify the plant, but just some of the ecology around the plant. And probably my favorite thing about it is the range description of where in Ohio these plants occur naturally. And so there are some keys in there that get you to genus and species. And there's really great illustrations. And so this image shows that. Really great illustrated images of the leaves and twigs and buds and flowers and fruit of a lot of the plants. And that also highlights some of the range maps there for county distribution of where these plants have been documented.
Hey, Tom.
Yep.
Could you please give the reference for the Lucy Braun video you were talking about? Google, Kentucky, what are they looking for?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the chat, a link to that.
Yeah, he'll do that as soon as Stephanie comes up. I'm trying to do it, but I got too many screens open. So.
And a quick note, the Peterson guide, I found that online about $20 new, and I was seeing about $10 to $15 used. And the Woody Plants of Ohio by Lucy Brown, I was looking online, it's about $40 new and about $25 to $30 used online.
Okay, Stephanie.
Yeah,
In the
so-
interest of time, I hate to move on without getting all the questions right now. So we probably from now on out will take the questions at the end.
Okay, I'll try to keep mine short. So the resource that I have highlighted here is actually one for winter ID. So I know this is a summer ID class and we're using keys to look at leaves, but a lot of people have a lot of trouble in the winter. So without those leaves, being able to key out a plant and figure out what it is. So this one was relatively new to me as of a couple years ago. We actually saw it somewhere, I can't remember where, but that year for Christmas, Jim and I got it for each other for Christmas. So we now have 2 copies of it because we both thought it was a really great book. But it uses those non-leaf features to work through identification of plants. And it is designed for Kentucky and Tennessee, so some of the plants in it don't relate to Ohio. But most of our Ohio trees and shrubs are in here. But what I really like about it is that it actually describes some of the uses of the plants. And so it will go into a little bit of information on what you can use that plant for, what you could eat, what parts you eat, or what plants are poisonous. And so that's kind of a interesting twist to a lot of our guides, but it has good photos in it and really useful keys, although they tend to use some technical terms. So these are just some photos of some of the keys in there. There are a lot of keys, but one of the good things is if you know it's oak, you can actually go straight to a key on oaks and avoid all the other species. And so then it'll work you through your oaks, and these are a few screenshots of oaks. It was multiple pages long because there are so many different species of oaks, but you can then narrow it down to your species. And for each of the species that are in the keys, there will be a description and then some winter photos. I don't think I have control, but it'll have these plates with different photos of the twigs and buds and fruit if it applies. So these are just a few of the photos of our oaks, some of our oaks.
And those are some of the best photos and keys I've ever seen. So
Yep.
it's probably worth it just for that.
And this one new is about $40, $45. I didn't look for any used prices, but I would guess it's probably in the same range as the Woody Plants of Ohio.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. I want to introduce you to one that I was involved with Division of Forestry, but Division of Wildlife published it. It's Trees of Ohio, and it's a field guide. It just came out about 2 years ago now. The good news is it's free. The bad news is it's probably hard to get now unless you want to download the PDF. But if you stop by a Division of Wildlife office, and you may be able to order these online as well, but they will hand these out and give them to you. You just have to kind of locate them. They cover a variety of species. Again, it's not all inclusive, but it covers about 80 species. And what I like, and I think it could be a very good companion to the key that you've got. Once you key to what you think it is, then you could go into this key and look at it and kind of confirm, hey, that makes sense. This is what I'm seeing. So again, it's a free alternative for you. I can try to give you the link for this, and it's very long and complicated. So the best thing I can tell you to do is go to this website, ODNR.gov, click on Our Documents, and then type the word tree in there, and it'll be the first thing that pops up. So again, ODNR.gov, Our Documents, type in tree, and it'll pop up, and you can download it. Again, any Division of Wildlife office, you should be able to stop by and get those too once things are back to normal and when they open back up.
Yeah, one comment, Dave. Many of you on here probably realize that ODNR's website is not fully functional. We actually lost pretty much everything on the website, and they have a temporary fix in place until we get a new one. So if you ever have trouble finding things, just let somebody know and we can help you get the resources.
I did do this yesterday, so it was working. Danny also mentioned that some of the soil and water offices like Hocking County do keep some copies on hand. If you're in Jackson, look me up or send me an email. We'll see once we get past COVID times, and we'll see, and we'll get you copies. I've got several. Another one that's online, wish we had more time to really focus on this one. Tough web address to remember. I'll get Julie to post that link in the chat box. But if you go to this website, it's Virginia Tech, and it's called Dendrology. Dendrology is basically the science of trees. Dendro means tree in Latin, so it's the study of trees. And they have an online field guide. You can actually click on whether you want a leaf key or a twig key in the winter. You can click on where you're located or even what zone, hardiness zone you're in. And then this live key pops up, which is pretty cool. You'll work through the key and answer the questions. Like, is it from a tree? And once I click tree, then it asks if it's a broadleaf, so it should sound pretty familiar to you. The next question is, are they opposite or alternate? And what's interesting, there's this list of probably 300 trees. Once you plug your location in, the list is shorter. Once you start answering questions, the list at the bottom of the page just gets shorter until you get to the right tree. You'll notice down here, it's starting with the maples because we clicked opposite and broadleaf. And then once you get to the tree, it actually has a fact sheet that you can print. If you got a color printer and you're a woodland owner or somebody wants to create a key of your own, you can actually print these for the trees that you have and kind of make up your own binder with your own ID key that's specific to you. You could tie it into and simplify it with our key, and you would have your own kind of personalized tree ID book. So I highly recommend the Virginia Tech webpage. And Julie has typed that in. There's also a phone app that's free. It's called V-Tree. It's great. You can type in your location, and then it will narrow that list for you, and all those keys are available right there online. very, very helpful phone app. It's great. I love having it when we're in the field so I can show people things that aren't there, like fruit and stuff. And then to wrap things up, we're pretty excited about this. I really want to publicly acknowledge Julie, who's on, and Sarah Swanson, who's down in Piketon at the South Centers. But we are introducing a series of tree ID clips, very short videos. We've got 6 up now. We're hoping to eventually have, you know, dozens, maybe 100 of trees and shrubs. I've got lots of partners like Jim and Tom and Stephanie are going to help create some of these videos. And they're just a 2 to 3 minute clip that focuses on an individual tree. So we're working on that. We've got about another 6 or 8 in the works that should be posted within a couple weeks. And I'll play the first one for you if it works. Is the sound coming through?
Yes.
Hi, I'd like to introduce you to another common maple in Ohio that many of you may not realize is a maple. It's the only maple that is native to Ohio that has compound leaves. It's known as box elder. Box elder can have leaves that have 3 leaflets that very much resemble poison ivy. It oftentimes has 5 leaflets, and I couldn't find any down low here that I could reach, but you can also have 7 leaflets on the same tree. So it is a maple. It will have opposite leaf arrangement, so when we look at the leaves and how they're attached, each leaf will have an opposing leaf on the opposite side of the twig. The other great characteristic for identification of this tree is that the young twigs, and even back into here, the twigs will be green in color. The new twigs, the newer they are, the lighter green they are. As you get further back, they'll be green. But those twigs will stay green in color year-round. A lot of new twigs are green, but once we get later in the growing season, into the fall, for other species, the twigs will turn brown or gray. But with box elder, these younger twigs will stay green year-round. So it's a great identification characteristic. It'll also have white, little rounded, woolly buds. Probably a little over 1/8 of an inch in diameter, and later in the growing season they'll be round and kind of white in color. Right now they have not set yet, so they're hard to show. In case you're not convinced that this is a maple, if you look closely, this tree has some fruit. And this is the classic fruit of a maple, the winged seeds that come in pairs. What makes box elder relatively easy to identify is it makes a nice angle, not quite a 90-degree angle, but with sugar maple, you have more of a horseshoe shape where the 2 seeds connect. This comes together in almost a 90-degree angle. So again, it's box elder maple that commonly grows on floodplains, along edges. It's a fast grower. It's a relatively small tree. Doesn't have a ton of wildlife value or much timber value at all, but it's a great species for riparian zones to help protect the soil. The bark's pretty much indescript as well. It'll have vertical streaks in it that will interlace, kind of a light gray to brown color. Really difficult to tell this species by the bark.
Okay, that'll wrap it up. Again, I want to thank Julie and Sarah for helping me do the editing. I'm trying to put the lipstick on the pig kind of thing for me. But we're hoping to get more of those out in about 2-week intervals. They'll be available. Again, the web link, let me go back to that, is go.osu.edu/treeid. go.osu.edu/treeid, and we'll stick that in the, looks like Julie's already got it there for me, good. So at this point, we are right at 11 o'clock. I really want to thank my panelists, Stephanie and Jim and Tom for helping out, and also Danny and Sarah and Jess for helping out to keep up with things. We will stay on for a while and take questions. So at this point, if somebody can help me see where we are, we'll field some questions. Again, thanks everybody for sticking with us on a beautiful day, and try to get out there and use that key. Okay, who wants to help me out with questions here?
So you want to talk about how people can learn about live programs in the future?
About live programs?
Yeah, maybe this, or how they can get.
Probably 2 of the best places to go for Ohio to go to live programs once we get back to normal times is the webpage you'll see on the screen right now is where we post all of our Day in the Woods events. And you can actually go there and subscribe, and you'll get live updates when we post new information. And then the Ohio Woodland Stewards Program, woodlandstewards.osu.edu, is also another place. We tend to focus Southeast Ohio woods down here in the southern Appalachian part of the state. Everyone's welcome. But Woodland Stewards got a more of a statewide footprint. And again, Julie will put that in the chat box, woodlandstewards.osu.edu. Other question?
There is a question about covering or asking for a link on how to transplant a tree from your own wooded area into a front or backyard.
Why don't you take my email address down there, apsley.1@osu.edu, and just send me that request. There's a lot of variables there, and I can probably help you out a little bit. The best deal apart, one of the things I want to mention with transplanting, you want the right tree for the right site. And this time of year is probably not the time to do it. We typically transplant larger trees in the fall or sometimes in the spring. I did notice also Phil Marshall posted about the oak key that's out there, the oak book, which is a wonderful publication. And if we can scroll, somebody can find that for me and scroll down. I don't know if you can, Julie, but there is a U.S. Forest Service free publication that's got the oaks in the eastern United States, and it's an absolutely wonderful publication to help with that keying. Again, once we get live, I've got some copies of that, and I'll be glad to help folks out.
Okay, are buckeyes hard to grow? That's a question.
Buckeyes are really not that tough to grow. Again, I can send you kind of a recipe, step-by-step guide on how to grow buckeyes. You want to get those mature fruits. You don't want to let them dry out. And then probably keep them cool and moist for a while. Put them in some good media, and they'll be fine. The big thing you got to do is protect them from the squirrels. But yeah, they're pretty easy to grow from seed. You got to have the right site, though. They're fairly finicky. They don't like super wet feet, and they don't like dry conditions, at least not the Ohio buckeye.
All right, I think that catches up. I typed in the link again for people to get the hard copy of the guide.
Folks are having issue with copying out of the links out of the chat, so they're wondering if they can have this at a different time.
So what we'll do when we're all done, I've got all your emails for everybody that's registered. We'll do a post with both sets of videos, the links to the keys. There's actually a discount coupon code that you'll find when you look at your registration email. There's a discount code that'll give you free shipping or 20% off. We'll post all those resources in one place on our Southeast Ohio Woods webpage, and then you can find all those things there. If you can't find it there, send me an email and I'll be glad to get it to you.
I did see there was a question about telling non-native Atlantis apart from some of the native lookalikes. And I see Danny put some things in the chat there. That is one of your trees where you can do a scratch and sniff test. Once you smell Atlantis, you will not forget it. So it's very easy to either scratch a twig or crush a leaf or break part of it off and smell it. It smells like burnt peanut butter / cat pee. I don't quite know how to describe it, but you won't forget it once you smell it the first time.
The other thing, it has these hugely fat twigs because leaves are they're compound leaves, and it can have, I think some of the keys say up to 51 leaflets. So if you're getting more than 20s, if you're getting into 30s or more leaflets, that's another great ID characteristic. And then
the other is those leaflets. So I think she put that they were like nodes or kickers on the bottom of the leaflets.
Notches. Right.
Yep, they'll have like 1 or 2 little notches at the base of each leaflet. And there's actually a gland, so you'll see a small bump and it will stink.
Okay. Well, again, thanks everyone, the panelists, and for all of you folks who stuck around. It looks like we're down to about 80, but at the peak, we're at 120 or so people who attended. We really appreciate all the help from everybody that made this happen. And hopefully it went well, but in the future, I hope we can go live and actually do it where we can get our hands on it. That's the best way to learn tree ID. So thanks, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.